Hi, thank you so much for joining us at the third annual The Loft's Wordplay Book Festival. I'm Steph Opitz, the founding director of the festival, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. Virtual Wordplay is a presentation of St. Catherine University and Star Tribune. This event is co-presented by our friends at the Literary Arts in Portland, Oregon, Black Mountain Institute in Las Vegas, and the Wisconsin Book Festival in Madison, Wisconsin. We at the Loft acknowledge that the state of Minnesota is located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The Loft and Open Book are built within the homelands of the Dakota people. The Loft recognizes the original peoples of this place and affirm tribal sovereignty. A few housekeeping items. There is a Ask a Question feature by the chat. If you would like to ask questions at the end of the session, you can enter them in at any time and we'll try to get them over to Alison and Cheryl. This event is recorded, so if you're here right now, you'll be able to access this event again until June 1st. I want to encourage you to buy all the books in the world, starting with Alison's latest, and you can also buy Cheryl's in the link as well. And this particular event has the added bonus, thanks to our friends in Wisconsin and Las Vegas, of the first 200 people to sign a link that's going to be in the chat get a free copy of The Secret to Superhuman Strength. So sign up for that right away. And after this event, you'll get an evaluation that we would really, really love for you to fill out. So if you've been to a lot of these events, you keep hearing us say that, but we mean it. It is my honor. Well, I was going to introduce Cheryl Strayed as the prodigal daughter, but now I'm realizing we have prodigal daughters because we're bringing all these former Minnesota residents back together. But I will say, since I'm introducing and have the great honor of introducing Cheryl Strayed to Wordplay, our prodigal daughter returns. In addition to her accolades as a #1 New York Times bestselling author, she offers generous and empathetic advice to folks through her Dear Sugar moniker, which has a book, a podcast, a newsletter. There's a lot of ways to access that. And if that wasn't spectacular enough, she counts Laura Dern and Reese Witherspoon among her real friends. So we are thrilled to have Cheryl Strayed here with us today. Thank you to the audience for being here at Wordplay, and I will let her take the microphone from here.
Thank you so much, Steph, and hi, everyone. What an honor it is to be back. And wow, I didn't expect that introduction, being called a prodigal daughter. I love Alison Bechdel, who I'm about to introduce, and the two of us both spent lots of years in the Twin Cities. So it's wonderful to be back. So Alison Bechdel doesn't really, she's one of those people, I think, okay, we always say she doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have been a huge fan of Alison since way back in the day when I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities and reading her Dykes to Watch Out For a comic strip and thinking like, who is this woman? I want to know her. She wowed me then, amazed me then. But I didn't know what I was in for until I read her best-selling memoir, Fun Home, which blew me away. I know I'm not alone in that. It was also made into a spectacular Broadway musical, and she followed it up with another beautiful memoir, Are You My Mother? She's won many awards, including the MacArthur Genius Grant, and now she has her third graphic memoir out called The Secret to Superhuman Strength. It's absolutely stunning, gobsmackingly beautiful. We expect nothing less. Please join me in welcoming the great Alison Bechdel to the stage, the Zoom stage, or whatever platform we're on. Hi, Alison.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you so much for doing this with me. It is a huge honor. I can hardly contain myself. It's really special to celebrate this book with you, who have written such an amazingly transcendent book about physical exertion yourself. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I thought about that connection a lot as I read this book. We can talk more about that later. But first, I want to just get to chatting about like how did this new book become? Why, so for those of you who haven't read it yet, it centers on essentially Alison's lifelong obsession with physical activity and fitness and exercise, the various things she's done, not only to strengthen her body, but I think to illuminate her understanding of who we are. So Alison, I'm curious, tell us the genesis story of this book.
This book has been gestating for, I feel like, almost my whole life, as long as I've been doing physical activities, or maybe ever since. I feel like in a way, this book really is my own version of the thing I sent away from a comic book as a small child. I saw an ad that promised the secret to superhuman strength. That's where the title comes from. It was one of those bodybuilding or self-defense ads in the comic books. And I think maybe that's when I started writing this book in the back of my head. I've just been collecting notes as I've gone along through life, not even taking notes. That's the thing about these physical activities for me, is they're blissfully free of this symbolic register. I'm not thinking or taking notes or attaching, concepts to this stuff. But that process has really interested me all along. What's going on in this other register? And I, as time went on, I felt like it was something I wanted to really try and explore in a book. Mm-hmm. I wanted to try and perhaps ruin it, take this thing that was so free of conceptual baggage and give it some. But I don't think I ruined it. I actually feel like it was a productive experiment.
One thing that really struck me over and over again in the book, you use this phrase that is the title. You talk about you did this sport or this thing, and you go, did I find it? Is this, have I finally reached that, the secret to superhuman strength? And there's so much about the book, I think, that is about seeking rather than attaining. That you're constantly, the whole book is a journey of you essentially longing to reach some kind of state that maybe you'll never reach.
Yes, it's definitely a quest, and it's ongoing. It's not like I had any super clear moment of catharsis or becoming enlightened. That's part of the joke.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think that the book is very much about obviously the trying to strengthen the body, but it's to find enlightenment, the soul's enlightenment. There's so much in this book that's about a spiritual quest, not just a physical one. And that those two things can be, and very often are, the same thing.
Yeah. In a way, I was trying to write about my whole life. I think I always, whenever I write anything, I somehow want to write everything. I want to convey everything I've ever thought or felt in a book, which of course is impossible. So this book starts when I was born, and it comes right up to the present moment, which is it's a very large swath of time for a memoir to cover. It's probably easier to tell a coherent story in a smaller time frame. So it's sort of experimental in that way, just taking this whole life and trying to make some sense of it. I mean, that's what I love about memoir, is that puzzle of trying to find a story in the randomness of our lives.
Yeah, it's absolutely, I love the organizing principle of your physical endeavors. And of course, at every turn, it becomes about so much more than that. I'm curious if you could show us, I understand you want to share with us, before we talk more deeply about the book, I think it'd be cool to see some data from it. Would you do that?
Yeah, great. I can show a few little slides here. I'll share my screen. And I'll talk us through them a little bit. Hang on. Okay. So, oh no, it's not really working, is it?
Let's see.
Huh. I'm unable to play my.
If you click over on those pages.
Oh, wait, no, here, wait, I got it. Yeah. Sorry. Whew. Okay. So this is the comic book ad that I responded to as a kid, Secret to Superhuman Strength. I don't think I need to tell you, it did not impart to me the secret to superhuman strength, this little booklet that I got in the mail. But it, planted this idea in my head. And it was just something that I sort of kept trying to pursue. I did all kinds of exercise as a kid and over the course of my life, for all sorts of reasons, not just to cultivate strength, but I feel like I get all kinds of mental and emotional and psychological and even metaphysical benefits from it. I have a tendency to get stuck in my head, and strenuous physical activity counteracts that. I think there's also an allure of self-sufficiency that this superhuman strength idea holds for me. The book proceeds through my life in chronological order, and so there's a kind of history of exercise trends represented as I try one thing after another.
Right. It's so interesting, Alison, in that way, because you did just bring me down memory lane. When back when we're girls, I remember being told you don't want to bulk up, or there were certain eras of ideas of what was fitness and what wasn't. I think you wrote about that quite interestingly.
Yeah, God forbid you should build up any muscles. So I also talk about how that feeling of working out, the feeling of runner's high, or that heightened focus, that's kind of a trance, is very similar to the feeling of being caught up in your creativity, that feeling of creative flow. Mm-hmm. And which was something that came much more easily to me as a child than it does now. So one thing I do in this book is I look at the relationship of a group of other writers to their creativity, including the British Romantics, Coleridge and William Wordsworth and Dorothy Wordsworth, who were always out walking in the hills and being very inspired by nature in their writing. And those guys inspired the transcendentalists. This is Margaret Fuller and Ralph Waldo Emerson, another bunch of writers who were very inspired by nature and were hippies. These guys were like super hippies 100 years ago, before there was any such thing, which fascinates me.
That's one thing I've learned. There's always been hippies. We didn't call them that.
Yeah.
Outsiders. They were disrupted, what we now say, disruptors, but they were creatives who had ideas that were outside, I guess, what we consider the moral zone. And
yeah, I mean, it was this whole lineage of them, like from the Romantics to the Transcendentalists, and the Transcendentalists inspired the Beats. I also write about Jack Kerouac and his book, The Dharma Bums, in my book.
Right.
Yeah, but it was this chain of these countercultural people talking about, Eastern ideas about divinity, talking about our connection to nature, all through the centuries. So
yeah, and I think maybe what all through the centuries is that each generation has to remember that they didn't invent that sort of outside the box or newer radical way of thinking.
I know. Wish we could hang on to this, and maybe we'd evolve a little bit.
Right.
So in the book, I also talk about my own efforts to meditate and to learn about this Buddhist idea about the self, that our self is really the root of our suffering. But it's very hard going. It's nothing like the very blissful experience I had when I was 20 on psilocybin mushrooms, when I clearly understood that I wasn't separate from everything else in the universe. So
I love that as you're talking, you're showing us these images. It's like you're narrating, you're doing a sort of narration of your graphic memoir. It's beautiful.
Well, it's hard I feel like I'm sort of a control freak, so I want to make sure people see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, so is that all the slides, or are there more?
I think.
Gosh, they're gorgeous.
That's it. Just like nature and flow. That's the end of my slides.
So let's go back. I want to, you sort of walked us through many of the things that I really am curious about. And I do want to go back to those earliest beginnings. I think that, as you said, this book, you tell it in chronological order. You were conveniently born in 1960, so you get to do these very, a decade by decade. You end like 2020, right? And
yeah,
that first decade, I was really struck by, what you longed for as a girl were so many things that you weren't allowed to long for. The clothes, the outdoor clothes that you discovered in the LL Bean catalog, the muscles that you immediately read you weren't supposed to grow, even things like, that sports weren't available to girls in that time and place. And I think we forget that's really recent history. And I'm curious if you can talk to us a bit about the ways that sexism and misogyny and the kind of erasure of like girls not being able to be strong, how that impacted you. One thing I wanted to share with you is I have a daughter who's 15, and she's been a feminist since she was a kid, and since she was born. And when she was maybe 6 or 7, I explained to her, she was asking about the Olympics and men's sports and women's sports. And I said, well, men are faster and stronger, so they run separately. And she became furious with me. And she said, that isn't true. That is not true. That is not true. And what struck me is I thought, well, what if we hadn't grown up with a narrative that girls and women were physically weaker than boys and men?
Yeah, it was so grating as a small child. It's hard to convey to young people today what it was like being a girl in the 1960s. It was like, it was like Mad Men times 1,000. It was just like wall-to-wall misogyny, 24 hours a day. Girls were dumb, girls were weak, girls were stupid. It's amazing any of us ever grew to maturity at all. And it was especially the idea of weakness was really bothersome to me as a little girl. Because I knew I wasn't weak. I knew I was strong. I was as strong as my brothers. I was always beating them up. So that just kind of rankled. And, as soon as I could, I started learning how to strengthen my body. I found a calisthenics book of my mother's, and it was amazing to me that you could actually do exercises and increase your endurance for a certain motion. And I could feel myself getting stronger, which was incredible. And I started running as a teenager too. And I love that feeling of endurance. So I was just kind of figuring this out on my own, I had gym class, but gym class didn't really do very much for me. I didn't really like gym class, even though I liked the stuff we were doing. But there was no athletic life for girls and barely for boys in those days compared with what there is now. Title IX didn't happen till I was in high school. So, there was 3 sports for girls at my school.
Do you in some ways, Alison, feel like having grown up in that kind of, I guess I'll just say cruelty. I want to say cruelty. It's a kind of scarcity. It's a you can't have this because you are female. Do you feel in some ways that actually increased your sense of I'm going to get this? I'm going to prove my worth by using my body and doing the things that have been denied me?
I do. But I also feel like I was, what I learned as I went along is that it's just a very effective psych out technique. Men tell women they're weak, tell women they can't do this or that. And it makes it very risky to try those things. One thing I really regret that I never did at all was, as a young person, was skateboarding and rock climbing and these really cool things that boys I knew were doing. But it honestly didn't occur to me that I could do those things. That was too risky and dangerous, and I wasn't going to try that.
Right. You had the sense of your fragility. I think too, very early on, I love this scene in the book where you've started to cross country ski, or Nordic ski, they call it, but and you're out there feeling what it feels like, not only just to be active and you know, testing your body, but you're in the natural world. And this scene you write about, seeing a dam break and this water come bursting down, and you were in awe of it. And you say that you've witnessed for the first time that you had this idea that you deeply understood that you were not the center of the universe. I'm wondering if you can talk about that, and that kind of place where physical exertion and exercise and nature, or the wild world, come into play.
Yeah, that moment was just one of those pivotal moments in life that really marked me. I was probably 16. I was out skiing along the creek in this beautiful Pennsylvania landscape at the time that the ice was going out on the creek. And I just happened to be there when all of a sudden, and it had been a very unusually cold winter. This creek hadn't frozen over since I was a little kid. And it was, in fact, when I went and looked at the historic records, it was the last really cold winter of the 20th century. But the creek had frozen and it was thawing, and these giant chunks of ice were piling up and the water was coming behind them. And as I stood there, this huge dam burst and all these giant chunks of ice just went flying down the stream, groaning and churning. And I was right there. It was incredible. Yeah, and it was a feeling of, I remember just feeling a sudden sense of perspective, like all this stuff goes on without me all the time. I happened to see it, and that was amazing, but the world is not revolving around me. And that was a wonderful feeling.
I had a very similar experience on the Pacific Crest Trail once. I was looking at a cliff, and I just saw this huge piece of the cliff just dislodge and come crashing down. And I didn't, you know, I wasn't near enough that I was harmed by it, but I witnessed it. And I had that same thing, you know, it happens without us. I think that nature has this really interesting way of reminding us that we're connected. Even though we're out there alone, we're connected to all living things, including the things that we think of as not living, like mountains and rocks and dams, right?
Yeah.
We're connected. And maybe that's, I was really curious. I want to ask you about these transcendentalists that you write about in this book, that you're making a connection between your journey on your physical, you know, the way you seek through the body, but also the way you seek to transcend yourself in the course of doing these various physical endeavors. And you write about literary transcendentalists who have contemplated these questions throughout time. Can you tell us a bit about that?
You know, I have to confess that I found Emerson actually pretty rough sledding. I made some efforts. I certainly read some of Nature, but I might have read all of Nature, but I found that language a little too antiquated to really get. I feel terrible admitting this. I could see little glimpses of something amazing that he was doing, but I just couldn't really get in the flow of his language. I had never read much Wordsworth. It was fun to try and read Wordsworth's poems and learn what those were about. I love the fact that he was kind of revising his prelude about his youth, about his like evolution as a poet over the course of his whole life. I feel like in some ways my book ended up sort of mimicking some of these writers' work that I was writing about, like Wordsworth's Prelude, endlessly revised story of his own development. Dorothy Wordsworth's journal. Like I never could have written this book without my endless and obsessive journal keeping over the course of my whole life. Kerouac's book, The Dharma Bums, was actually kind of his own weird version of the Diamond Sutra. And I feel like in some ways I'm copying both Kerouac and trying to give my own version of the Diamond Sutra in this book. So I feel like I was just doing a lot of copying of these people who I was writing about, including you, Cheryl. It just, as I thought about doing this talk with you, I realized, oh my God, you used all these poems from Adrienne Rich's Dream of a Common Language in Wild. Yeah. And I wasn't ripping you off, I promise, but one of her poems from Dream of a Common Language is also like a through line in my book. But
yeah, no, Alison, that when I came to that page, I was just like, because so in Wild, I carried Adrienne Rich's The Dream of a Common Language with me on my entire hike. All the other books, I burned them along the way as I read them. Yeah. But I couldn't do this. This was like my sacred text, right? And I read the first night I'm out there on the trail, I read her poem, Power. And, it's a very meaningful book to me. And so I actually love that. You use the word copying, but, when you think about Emerson or Wordsworth or these writers you just named, I don't think of it that way. That I really love the way that your work references explicitly so many other works, but I think in all of our writing, right, we're always even referencing implicitly. Like you weren't maybe conscious when you were writing about Adrienne Rich, but we were there together. There was a certain thing that we both tapped into, a different version of the thing, and yet also the same thing. And so that kind of legacy, I think, lives in a lot of us in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just tell a funny story about how I did come to use that poem in my book?
Please do.
I was doing a drawing exercise to kind of free up my drawing and to be more spontaneous. I was practicing brush drawings, and I got a big scroll of rice paper, and every day I would do a little addition to this drawing. So it was like actually one long continuous drawing. And if I screwed up, it would kind of ruin the whole scroll. So I had to really focus on what I was doing. And one day I made my drawing, and as I was doing it, I drew myself reading a book, because that's what I'd been doing all morning, reading biographies of all these writers I was learning about. And the words transcendental, etude came into my head. So I just wrote them down in cursive on my drawing, and I didn't know where it had come from. I had to go Google it. And first I got Liszt's piano pieces, and then it said transcendental etude, Adrienne Rich. And I thought, oh, right, that poem.
Right.
I hadn't really remembered it. I honestly read more of Rich's essays than poems when I was young, but when I looked up the poem, it was very, very familiar. The stuff about no one ever told us we had to study our lives. And I felt like that really was kind of what I was trying to do in this book, like trying to understand my life. And that poem, which I still don't understand, it's a very long, incredible poem, but it has the word life in it about 40 times. And I feel like it's a poem about being alive. And the more you read it, the more is revealed to you somehow.
I think it's interesting. I love that you wrote that in the book, that there's this poem you love, and even though you don't understand it entirely, you've read it all these times. And I find that that's true over and over. Once I wrote about The Dream of a Common Language in Wild, so many people then were like, well, explain this book to me. Tell me the meaning of this book. And I am like, I don't know. I think what we're responding to, obviously there are all kinds of things that are meaningful to us in those words, but I think what we're responding to maybe is a recognition. Here you are, you discovered that book, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were really stepping into the truth of of being a lesbian, of like who you actually were instead of who you were expected to be. And maybe you just recognized yourself in her words.
Definitely. I mean, it's really a poem also about transformation. I mean, that whole book is about her transformation and different ways women have transformed themselves, and the necessity of transforming ourselves, which is what Wild is about, and which you did so beautifully. Like I envy the clear arc of transformation in your book. I feel like in my story, over the course of my whole life, it kind of loops around. It's not like a clear through line. It's this spiral of coming around and around to the same issues over time.
Well, thank
but
you.
Getting a little.
Thank you for that. And let me just assure you that the book I'm writing right now is like that kind of loop. I mean, I think one of the hike provided me with a sort of narrative arc that fits neatly into a memoir. But as you said, I think the complicated thing about writing memoir, and certainly I saw this in this book, this new book, is you're writing about your whole life and trying to tell, a particular story, and yet you've got all this material, and how do you find your way through it? And
yeah,
I think one of the most moving and powerful aspects of this book for me that just absolutely blew me away was the ways, how vulnerably and how honestly you write about creativity and your own anxieties and struggles with doing your work, which I want to say I deeply relate to. And, Alison, it was all I could do to not be just like, okay, I'm going to drive to Vermont and then we're going to take a road trip together and talk about how to work, because
that would be awesome.
It's like, I think obviously, you've been given a Genius grant. We both have best-selling books, and from the outside, people think, oh, okay, well, they just do their work and they just la-di-da, they know how to do it. And that's not the truth at all. So can you talk to us first about, how difficult it has been for you over the years to create, to find that flow, as you say, to not procrastinate, all that stuff that you write about in the books. Will you share some of that with us here?
I don't want to seem too self-indulgent. I mean, it's not like I have to go like into the coal mines every day. It's a pretty good job. It does have its difficulties, but they're not so bad in the grand scheme of things. But it's hard when you have to make stuff up out of thin air all the time. I guess for me, it's the gradual realization that it doesn't have to be from thin air, that if you can like quiet down and open yourself, it's all there. But that's very hard for me to get to. It's very hard for me to let things happen. I'm always trying to control things, always trying to push and force. And, it works up to a certain point. When I was younger, I could, work on a deadline for a couple nights straight. Like I just stay up and push through and get something done. But I can't do that anymore. My body won't let me do that. So I'm having to find other ways to just use my creative energies in a more sustainable manner. But that's what the whole.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to blather.
And have you found the way? Please, Alison, tell us the way. I mean, what I'm curious about is you write a lot about struggle in this book, and even the struggle to write this book. It's very kind of meta in that way. And I'm curious if you, over the evolution of your creative life, if you've come, in this book, you describe a sort of increasingly greater sense of peace with yourself in various aspects of your life. Certainly in your previous books, you're reckoning with your father in Fun Home, you're reckoning with your mother in Are You My Mother, among many other things, of course. And in this book, I do think in so many ways, you're ultimately reckoning with, your that sense of seeking, that seeking the secret, of course, to superhuman strength, but also to kind of an ease when it comes to doing your work. And I'm curious if it has gotten easier. What's that arc?
It has gotten somewhat easier, along with the exercise and other things I've done. I've also done a lot of therapy, and I've learned a lot in therapy about my creativity and in these supposed blocks that I've created for myself. God, I'm not good at using words. I'm not good at speaking. I need to just like be in a dark room by myself and I'll be fine.
You're doing great.
I wanted to say that one thing I learned in therapy which was on one level about relationships and intimacy, but in another level helped me with my creativity, was learning to see ways that I had kind of given my own creativity over to my partner, Holly. When I met Holly, I was entranced by her very easy connection with her own creativity. She was a painter. She would just sit down and make a painting and enjoy it. And it was not a problem. And over the course of our relationship, I just kept feeling like she's got the real flow and I'm just struggling and stuck. And finally, my therapist pointed out to me that I had like, that wasn't true. I had just handed that over to her somehow. And as soon as I saw that dynamic, I was freed of it, you know? So that was one big thing that has helped me to have more ease with my work, to just realize it's mine, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe I'm curious if you think that kind of resistance is part of actually your creative process. Like, what if I mean, the thing that I've been thinking about lately in my own creative process is that resistance and that fear is part of my ability to make it. It's not the thing that obstructs me from making it, but it's part of me actually being able to make it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I do believe that on some level, and certainly all my struggle paid off. So therefore, shouldn't I keep struggling? Isn't it good for it to be difficult? So I don't know. What do you think?
That's it. That's what I'm saying. It's like, I mean, that's what's so funny is you're saying how hard it is for you to do this. And yet what you've done is all of this, you know, decades of brilliant work. So it's fascinating. I'm just fascinated by it. I think that you write about it really powerfully and honestly, like I said, and I think too, one thing we haven't touched on, we only have so much time today, and I will turn to the audience questions soon, but you know, the ways that therapy and Buddhism and meditation and mindfulness, all of these things that are about sort of seeing beneath the surface, you know, acceptance, you know, all of those things, I think that you have to be confronting that all the time too in your writing, that you're doing in so many ways the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a spiritual quest. But, you know, it didn't used to be. As a child, it was so easy. I feel like that image sticks with me. Sorry, my printer suddenly started spitting something out if you're hearing a strange noise. You know, I feel like I want to get back to that childhood state, just like I want to get back to the feeling I had when I was tripping when I was 20. Like those feeling states remain like goals for me.
Mm-hmm. And they are, in so many ways, the state you're seeking when you were seeking the superhuman strength, I imagine.
I'm sorry, I got distracted by my printer.
That's okay. I just said it brings us back around to, I think, too, the connection that you're making throughout the book of that you're seeking that kind of state in a way through your when you're doing the physical exercise that you're doing, the various things.
Yes. Yeah, those things for me actually are like kind of a hack, like kind of a shortcut into that feeling, which is so much harder to get to creatively than physically. It's much easier to just go for a run than to write a book.
Right. And then you have to do both. And there you are, both very prolific and incredibly fit, Alison. So there is an upside. So I think there are so many millions of things I haven't asked you, and I might butt in during the audience questions to ask some more if they prompt me. But I'm going to turn now to some questions from those of you out there who are listening and watching us. I guess you can see us. This is from Susan Stinson. She says, "I'm shy to talk about."
Hi.
Oh, you know Susan? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, Susan.
Susan is a wonderful writer.
That name sounds so familiar to me. So maybe I know Susan too. I'm shy to talk about spirituality or religion, to try to put to words to the ineffable. Do you have any of that kind of hesitation? Does drawing move you through it? If yes, does bodily exertion do this in a similar way? It's kind of what we were just talking about, but chat, please address that.
I too have difficulty talking about the ineffable. I mean, that's the nature of it. I hesitate. I even stumble with the word spirituality. I would like to think that all the stuff I'm writing about is all measurable and empirical, and I think it is, but it does veer into this zone of the numinous, and where language just becomes difficult, where language kind of fails, which is an interesting place. I find that exciting, and I guess I was hoping, in a way, that the fact that this is a graphic book and that I'm doing a lot of drawings, that my drawings, especially drawings of me outside in nature, could take up some of that slack, like things I can't really put into words, or I don't have the skill to put into words. Ralph Waldo Emerson did, Cheryl Strayed does, but I need the pictures too. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say the picture, there are several questions here about drawing and writing, and that relationship. Do you draw first? Do you write first? Does the drawing feel like physical? It's a physical experience in the way that the writing, or is that not the case for you?
No, it is. That's actually something I thought about a lot as I was drawing this book, is what a gloriously physical activity it is to draw. I'm holding a pen and dipping it in ink. I'm dealing with paper, and I draw for hours on end, and it's like a sort of endurance exercise. So I feel like there's something physical that happens with that line coming out of my hand onto the page that is different from what I might type, or the stuff I do on the computer. It feels it is very embodied, and I think it can't help but I feel like drawing is a kind of tracing of the world for me. Like I'm showing you what I'm seeing, but I'm also touching it, and then you're holding it in your hands, and it's like this transmission, this touch-based transmission.
And I saw in this book you did some new things, right? The color, and that, can you talk, why did you decide to do this differently? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I never did a book in full color before. It's a lot of work. I knew it would be a huge amount of work. Even one color adds a lot of work to black and white comics. And my partner, Holly, the artist, helped me because there was just too much work for me to do in the time I had. She was able to come on board and color these images that I was making. And it was a funny process, because it wasn't like she was sitting there with a beautiful palette of watercolors. She did, all the colors you see in the book are actually gray ink. And she was doing them in layers of cyan and magenta and yellow, like creating color separations, basically, that then got turned into color on the computer. It's a very geeky process. I won't go on any more about it, but the end result is, I think, these very luminous, washy colors that I really like a lot.
Yeah, they look almost like a watercolor kind of quality, but not.
They are. She was doing it physically too. It wasn't on the computer. She was painting with a brush and gray ink. So all that stuff is actually painted. Yes.
So that's fascinating. It's an interesting collaboration.
It was
what you wanted to do, then she would paint over it, or are there parts of it that she actually originate?
Well, it was a process determining that. I'm used to working alone. I've rarely collaborated with anyone, but here was a necessary collaboration. And I tried to control as much as I could, as I am wont to do, by showing her, I want this to be red and this to be green. I do a sketch with colored pencils and then hand it over to her. But inevitably, she ended up having to make a lot of creative decisions on her own. And I had to let go. I had to turn it over. So that was kind of cool, because I was like having to live out the thing I was writing about. You know,
Yeah,
just
I mean, in the book, you this is why I feel like I can ask this question, because in your book, you write a lot about your romantic relationships and the impact that your work had on them, that very often your partners felt that you kind of were choosing work over everything else.
yeah.
So what your method with Holly was just come aboard and I'll put you to work?
Well, we've been over a lot of stuff. You know, I've always been very rigid about my work, about staking off the world of my work, and it would always come first. And with Holly, that wasn't quite as possible as it had been previously in my life. She wouldn't let me get away with that. And I've gradually gotten much better at like taking time off and having weekends and stuff. But it was fun to have her in these final throes of this project with me. Usually that's a lonely place when, you know, you're finishing something on your own, and you might be around other people, but you're still in your own world.
Right.
But in this case, we were together in that world, and that was really great.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's absolutely fascinating. Now, one other question about that I was curious about, that I've see a few people asking is, you know, what is that relationship between the drawing and writing? Which comes first? Is it always that you have the language, or that you have the image?
It looks like I'm writing first. If you were looking over my shoulder, I'm sitting on the computer and I'm typing, but I'm writing in a drawing program. I've got panels drawn on the screen, and I'm placing my text in them, and I'm envisioning what the images in those panels are going to be. Like, that's how I write. I'm not actually making those drawings, but I kind of know this is going to be, you know, I know what that picture is going to be. And before I hit on this technique of writing in Illustrator, when I started writing Fun Home, I just started with a word processing document because I didn't know how else to do it. And I try and to say, this is panel 1, this is panel 2, like maybe like a comic book script would look, but I couldn't really, I couldn't write that way. I couldn't figure out where the story was going. Mm-hmm. So it's very much visual in my head, and the images are driving the story along with the words, but you just don't see the images till the final stage, if that makes any sense.
It does. I think that's so much, it seems to me, my sense of not only your work, but frankly of so much creative work, is that you make this plan, and then so much is kind of born in a sort of intuitive sense that the work takes you in the direction that it needs to go.
Well, yeah, the cool thing is when I do start drawing, everything changes. The words change. You know, I start seeing ways that the drawing can convey information that I thought I had to impart in the text. And so that calculus is always shifting once the actual drawing starts. And the idea is to get the words down to as few as possible, and to show as much as I can in the image.
That's so interesting. So here's a question from Heather. She says, nature and flow and movement are interwoven in this text as you use them in ways to get out of your head. But in turn, it seems they've given you clarity to return to your head, which then fuels your art. Can you talk a bit about that cyclical process of how you think, find inspiration, think, write, repeat, or whatever it looks like for you?
That's interesting. Yeah, it does. It all does come back into my head. I made a joke earlier about how I took this kind of wordless realm of life of exercise and physicality and pinned it down with words. But there's something freeing about that, actually. Like I feel like I've articulated something, that was worth doing, but I had to go through that whole process, like taking it from out there and running it through here. I'm feeling very inarticulate. I need to have a whiteboard and I could draw some pictures.
I think I'll speak for all of those people out there listening who we can't see, that you're being quite articulate indeed. So another question from hear this book, and those of you out there who haven't read it yet, one of the delights of it is that Alison really does walk us through, this exercise, this sport and that, and yoga, and, we get so many different activities, hiking and biking and just all of that. But so A's question, which I think is really a very interesting one. How does your book speak to people with disability?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I feel like when I was younger, in my 20s and hanging out in my lesbian feminist community, it was actually like I had to be secret about my exercise life. Like exercise was not something that you flaunted. And, it was very much, I felt like partly it was like flaunting your able-bodiedness, partly it was flaunting your fitness, and maybe this implicit assumption that you were exercising in order to lose weight. Exercise was just kind of an anti-feminist enterprise. So it was something I honestly didn't talk about much when I was younger. I was doing karate in a feminist context, so that was okay. But other stuff like running or weightlifting, I just kept that under my hat, But I couldn't help feeling as I wrote this book, like, yeah, I really am like flaunting my able-bodiedness in this way that might seem really annoying. And for a while, I had a strand of the book where I was making that explicit and talking about it, and it didn't fit in the end. And I just decided I'm just going to talk about how I love to do these things and hope people don't take it amiss. So I can certainly understand if people do, but it's something I get a lot of pleasure from, and I thought, why not just talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're one question from Jamie Jacobson is, I'm curious how long it takes you to finish one of your books. Sometimes it's discouraging to me how long it takes to finish a drawing or even a short comic, Jamie writes.
Oh, comics is such a time-intensive activity. This book took me 8 years. I mean, that's like a crazy long time for a book. I was sort of distracted and busy for some of it, but and actually the drawing was the least of that. I did most of the drawing in like a year of like 12-hour days. But I feel like it takes a long time for ideas to gestate, for a real story to emerge. I don't like having to churn stuff out very quickly, and I like having time to marinate in ideas. And fortunately, I've been able to afford to do that. Like it's worked out so far, but it takes me a long time.
So we are running out of time. So I want to just end on maybe a couple last questions from the audience, but then I have one. I'm sort of inspired to ask my own based on this final one that says, speaking of collaborations, about a dozen audience members in the chat want to know if the two of you, that's me and you, Alison, will co-write / draw a road trip memoir. I guess he took it literally when I said, but here's the thing. One of the things I have realized over the time that I have known you through your work, because we've never met in person until today. We're not even in person, but we've never spoken directly, is that I was actually born just like an hour and a half from where you grew up in Pennsylvania. I was born.
What?
Yeah. It's a little known fact, because people think of Minnesota. I grew up in Minnesota, but the first 5 years of my life, I lived in Cambria County. I was born in in what used to be called Spangler, Pennsylvania, that's now Northern Cambria or something like this. They changed the name of the town, but it's just an hour and a half. I Google mapped it yesterday. It's just an hour and a half.
Cool.
So maybe we could start our road trip there.
Spangler, that's a very local Pennsylvania name. I knew Spanglers.
Yeah, well, that's where
let's do it.
So on that note, after when we finally, if it takes us a while to get to that road trip memoir, what do you imagine next? I mean, I know it's hard to be immediately saying, here's the next book I'm writing, but where is your imagination taking you next in your literary life? And where are your physical interests taking you in your exercise life?
My next book, I have a sense that it's going to be about, it's going to be about money, but also I think about time. I'm running out of topics. Exercise was like something I felt very passionate about. So I knew that there was a book there for me, but now I'm like, what else do I care about? I have always kept very close accounts of my financial life. So I'm thinking, I've just had this sense that I can do something with that. I don't know what yet, but I love the way that, a ledger is just a list of stories. Like everything you buy is a transaction, is something that happened in your life. And I'm going to do something with that somehow. I'm going to use my decades worth of financial records.
Have you kept a ledger of everything you've spent?
Since I was in my 30s. I mean, and I have random little physical ledger books that I kept, like one I started when I was a kid, and I would put my allowance and my babysitting money and eventually how much money I spent on pot. I have some of those old ledgers, which I'll maybe make use of too.
That's amazing, Alison. So what about the exercise stuff? What are you into these days?
I've been running. Running has really saved me over recent years. I started doing it slowly in like 2014, 2015, and started being able to go for long runs by election day 2016, which really, really helped me so much. Running is salvational for me. It really, really calms me down. So it kind of got me through the Trump administration without losing my mind.
Yeah, well, hiking does the same for me. That's what we should do. Like Gary Snyder and Jack Kerouac. Let's go.
We should. Oh my God, that would be so much better than the Dharma bums. Are you still doing long distance hikes?
I haven't done a truly long distance hike for some time, but I do longish distance hikes. Take a week backpacking trip here and there. So the next thing, I was meant to go hiking in Wales this summer, and that got canceled because of the pandemic, but I'm going to Iceland this summer. I'm going to do a bunch of hikes.
Oh, wow.
It's still my favorite.
Really want to go to Iceland.
Me too. I'm going in August.
That sounds amazing.
Come on up and we'll hike a mountain together.
That would be amazing. I'm going to crash your trip.
Okay. Alison Bechdel, it has really been a pleasure to talk to you. And, we touched on so many different things that this book touches on, but I want to just say that in closing is that we begin with the body and the ways that you have explored all of so many different ways of exerting yourself physically. But I think what was most powerful and moving to me is just the vulnerability and candor with which you write about how you are seeking to sort of meld that, to transcend the body and mind and be spirit and soul. And that was really, really moving to me. I loved this book.
Cheryl, thank you so much. What an honor to get to talk about it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who have been tuning in here today. Is tuning in the word to use to what we're doing on Zoom? I don't know, but I'm like an old school kind of radio person. And I just want to, in closing, thank the folks at Wordplay who hosted us. And I think too that I'm meant to give some kind of thanks to all the people who made this happen.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a big group. It's like some big consortium of places. Thank you.
Exactly. The folks at St. Catherine's and all of the literary folks who came together to make this event possible. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Alison.
Thanks, Cheryl. Bye.
Bye.